In 2020, the residents of a small coastal city in Japan did something that sounds completely insane. They crowdfunded 500 million yen, roughly $3.5 million, to buy a sword. Not a building, not a park, a single blade forged sometime in the 13th century that most of them would never be allowed to touch. The sword was called the Sanchamo. It had been sitting in a private collection for decades. When it went up for sale, the people of Satuchi City pooled their money through a public campaign, and every donor received a certificate of symbolic ownership. They raised the full amount in 2 years. To most of the world, spending millions on a weapon that hasn't seen combat in centuries sounds absurd. But to understand why a Japanese sword can cost more than a house, sometimes more than everything you own combined, you have to understand how one is actually made. Because once you see the process, the price isn't the surprising part. The surprising part is that anyone still agrees to do it. It starts with sand. Iron sand, called satetsu, collected from riverbeds and mountains in Shimane Prefecture on Japan's western coast. This is the only region in the country where the right kind of iron sand exists, and the Japanese government strictly controls who can access it. Even master swordsmiths have to apply in advance and specify exactly how much they'll need for the year. That sand gets loaded into a tatara, a rectangular clay furnace about 4 feet tall and 12 feet long. Here's the thing about the tatara. It's built by hand, used once, and then destroyed. Every single smelting requires building a new furnace from scratch. Once the tatara is fired, workers begin feeding in layers of iron sand and charcoal, a few scoops at a time, every 10 minutes, around the clock. The whole process takes roughly 72 hours, 3 days and 3 nights of continuous labour, with teams working in shifts to keep the temperature steady and the bellows pumping air. If the heat drifts too far in either direction, the entire batch is ruined. When it's over, they break apart the clay walls and pull out a massive lump of raw steel called a kira. A single burn consumes around 9 tons of iron sand and 11 tons of charcoal. From all of that, you get roughly 2 tons of kira. But less than a third of that kira is actually usable for swords. The rest has too much or too little carbon. The usable portion is called tamahagan, which translates to jewel steel. It's produced only a few times a year by the Society for Preservation of Japanese Art Swords, and it's sold exclusively to licensed swordsmiths. You can't buy it on the open market. You can't substitute modern steel. If the blade isn't made from tamahagane, it isn't legally considered a Japanese sword. So before a smith even picks up a hammer, the raw material has already taken 3 days to produce, burned through 20 tons of fuel and ore, and yielded a fraction of usable steel. And the expensive part hasn't started yet. The swordsmith takes those chunks of tamahagane and sorts them by carbon content. High carbon pieces become the outer shell of the blade, the part that holds the cutting edge. Low carbon pieces become the core, the part that absorbs impact and keeps the sword from snapping. The whole genius of a Japanese blade is that it's not one material. It's 2 metals fused together, each doing a completely different job. The smith heats the steel, hammers it flat, folds it over, and hammers it flat again. This gets repeated 10 to 15 times. Each fold doubles the number of layers, so after 15 folds, you're looking at over 32,000 layers compressed into a single bar. Folding removes impurities and evens out the carbon, but it also creates something else, a visible grain pattern on the surface of the finished blade called hada. Every sword's grain is unique, like a fingerprint in steel. Once both steels are folded and refined separately, the smith shapes the hard outer steel into a long channel, nests the softer core inside it, and forges the two into one piece, hard on the outside, flexible on the inside. But the most critical moment in the entire process is still ahead. The smith coats the blade in a mixture of clay and charcoal powder, thick along the spine and thin along the cutting edge. Then the blade is heated to just below 815 degrees Celsius. Any hotter and it cracks. The smith pulls the glowing blade from the forge and plunges it into water. This is the quench, and it's where everything can go wrong. The thick clay on the spine cools the metal slowly, keeping it relatively soft. The thin coating on the edge lets it cool fast, making it extremely hard. That difference in cooling rate is what causes the blade to curve. The iconic bend of a katana isn't shaped by hand. It happens naturally in the water in about 2 seconds, and that same moment creates the hamon, the wavy temper line running along the edge that collectors obsess over. If the quench goes badly, if the temperature was slightly off, or the clay was uneven, the blade cracks, and months of work are destroyed. There's no repairing it, you start over. A finished blade then passes to a polisher, and this stage can take longer than the forging itself. Using a series of increasingly fine stones, sometimes 7 or more grades, the polisher reveals the steel's grain pattern and brings out the Hayman. A master polisher might spend 2 to 3 weeks on a single sword, working entirely by hand. A bad polish can destroy an otherwise perfect blade by wearing away too much steel or distorting the geometry. It's considered one of the most skilled and least appreciated roles in the entire craft. After polishing, other specialists take over. One makes the handguard, another carves the scabbard from magnolia wood, another wraps the handle in ray skin and silk cord. A single sword might pass through a dozen pairs of hands before it's finished, and the full process from raw steel to completed weapon can stretch past 3 months. And here's where the economics get brutal. Under Japanese law, a licensed swordsmith can produce a maximum of 24 swords per year, 2 per month. The license itself requires a minimum of 5 years of unpaid apprenticeship under an established master, followed by an 8-day certification exam from Japan's Agency for Cultural Affairs. In 1989, there were about 300 registered swordsmiths in the country. That number has since dropped below 200, and only around 30 of them can survive on swordsmithing alone. So the supply's tiny, the training is brutal, the materials are rare and government controlled. The process is almost entirely manual, using techniques that haven't fundamentally changed in over 1,000 years. A new sword from a certified smith typically costs between $10,000 and $25,000. From the most prestigious names, prices climb to $60,000 or beyond, but those are the new ones. Antique Japanese swords exist in a completely different price universe. Blades from the Kamakura period, roughly the 13th century, are considered the golden age of Japanese sword making, and surviving examples are treated with the same reverence as a Renaissance painting. The most famous name in the history of the craft is Masamune, Kamakura-era smith, whose blades are considered the absolute pinnacle. Only about 6 of his swords are confirmed to still exist. 7th, the Honjo Masamune, was passed down through the Tokugawa shogunate for generations as a symbol of political power. After World War II, when American occupation forces ordered Japanese citizens to surrender their weapons, Honjo Masamune was handed over to a police station in 1946. Nobody has seen it since. If it surfaced today, its value would be essentially incalculable. What drives prices at this level isn't just age, it's provenance, meaning who owned the blade and what battles it survived. It's the smith's identity, verified through a signature on the tang or through expert appraisal by organisations like the NBTHK, and its condition, because a sword that's been poorly stored, over-polished, or shortened loses value the way a painting loses value when it's been badly restored. I'm curious what collectors in the comments think matters most when it comes to valuing antique blades, because people argue about this constantly. What makes the whole thing even stranger is that Japan almost lost this tradition entirely. After World War II, the American occupation banned sword production outright, and thousands of antique blades were confiscated and destroyed. The craft nearly vanished. It was only through preservation societies and the Japanese government reclassifying swords as cultural art objects, not weapons, that swordsmithing was allowed to continue at all. Today, the industry runs on a kind of beautiful stubbornness. The tamahagain is smelted in a furnace that has to be rebuilt every time it's used. The steel is folded by hand. Quench still depends on the smith's instinct, not a thermostat. And the smiths doing this work are aging out faster than new apprentices can replace them, partly because a 5-year unpaid apprenticeship is nearly impossible to sustain in modern Japan. A Japanese sword is expensive because every step in its creation is as difficult as it could possibly be. Not because anyone chose to make it hard, but because the difficulty is the point. The folding creates the grain, the clay creates the curve, the quench creates the Hayman. Use modern steel, skip the folding, automate the polish, and what you end up with might cut just as well. But it won't be a Japanese sword, it'll be a knife shaped like one. People who buy these blades, who spend thousands or millions, aren't paying for sharpness, paying for the fact that someone spent 3 months turning sand into something that will still be beautiful in 800 years.